Hello, my name is Vsevolod Filimonenko. I am a journalist. Today, my guest is politician, leader of the Libertarian Party 510, and member of parliament of the third convocation, Gennady Balashov. We are starting our regular segment for our British, American, and European viewers, for the entire English-speaking audience, about the situation in Ukraine. So let's get started. Gennady Viktorovich, please tell us what is the real situation in Ukraine right now and what are the most pressing issues?
Ukraine is bleeding, filled with hatred and humiliation. And of course, people are asking how long this will go on and who is to blame. In this situation, we have serious grievances, including towards the West. Haven't you tormented Ukraine enough already to finally put a stop to all this? The European Union, together with the Americans, has all the power to stop Putin, to close the skies. But as of today, that decision has not been made. Lengthy negotiations are ongoing, and it seems to me that European leaders remain interested in the war in Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine enriches their military-industrial complex, allows them to allocate more funds for armaments, and this is regrettable for Ukrainians, including the involvement of the United States of America. They have profited tremendously from this war, and I think it's high time to take tougher measures against Putin and to stop this bloodshed.
Tell me, why is it that after two significant revolutions and the direct intervention of various European institutions, Ukraine still regrettably remains a highly corrupt state?
Well, probably because when you change a country, it is made up of people, and to change overnight a country that borders corrupt Russia, which exerts its corrupting influence on Ukrainian territory, because all the presidents before Zelensky, at least to some extent, interacted with the Russian Federation in terms of business, though to a lesser and lesser degree. And Zelensky is no exception. Essentially, only the war today is finally severing Ukraine from the Russian Empire. In other words, the Russian Empire is losing its political influence over the territory of Ukraine. This is one of the positive factors that may soon lead Ukraine into the European Union. I think that society changes slowly, and the influence of neighboring states that do not want Ukraine to join the European Union or NATO leads to Ukraine finding itself caught between two huge empires, the Russian Federation and the European Union.
Tell me, how did it happen that during the war, 73% of Ukrainians elected not a typical politician, but a comedian as president? What does this say? And in general, please share your overall opinion of President Zelensky. What kind of person is he?
After Maidan, Ukrainians initially had a fear of war, especially when Putin seized Crimea and entered it with his little green men. Ukrainians developed a fear of war. And in fact, Poroshenko was elected out of fear of war. That is, in the first round, I voted for Poroshenko so that we would have a president as soon as possible and there would be no grounds for Putin to invade Ukrainian territory. But as we know, by voting for Poroshenko as a president who would bring peace and in principle pursue a peaceful policy, Ukrainians ended up being deceived. Because my post-Maidan government followed the lead of US aid, and they were quite aggressive. NATO accession was inserted into the constitution, language laws were introduced, and religious issues were also included. And this made the citizens of Ukraine dissatisfied. So for the second time, they voted for President Zelensky's peace initiatives, hoping that he would not be like Poroshenko and drag us into a war of confrontation with Russia. After voting for Zelensky, we then saw Zelensky being influenced by USAID activists and patriots. And Zelensky betrayed his voters and essentially moved towards a military confrontation with the Russian Federation because he did not sign the second Minsk agreements. But in this situation, both the West and Zelensky miscalculated in the sense that the Soviet Rat, the KGB one, turned out to be quite ruthless and invaded Ukraine in 2022. That's really how it all turned out.
Tell me why, despite numerous and significant peace initiatives from both sides, has it still not been genuinely possible to fully achieve this very elusive peace and bring about a lasting resolution? Is it because Zelensky doesn't want it, because he's afraid of losing power?
But I think it's the Russian rat that doesn't want to end the war because they've dangerously restructured their economy for war and have greatly inflamed those people who profit from this war. So the danger for the Kremlin's power in ending the war is that it could lead to Putin himself being overthrown. And for Ukraine, it turned out that over these 3 years, Zelensky's regime has become so accustomed to wartime restrictions and is making so much money that they also don't want the war to end. And that's why we ended up, plus, on top of that, Europe isn't really eager for the war to end either, because Russia is getting weaker, and that suits everyone. And in the United States, in principle, they see this as destruction of the Soviet arsenal of weapons and as a way to show that Russia is essentially toothless, because under the cover of the war in Ukraine, they took Syria away from Putin. Now they're taking Iran, and they are achieving their goals at the cost of Ukrainian lives and the destruction of cities on Ukrainian territory.
Tell me, despite the fact that Ukraine has signed an association agreement with the European Union, is generally demonstrating European aspirations and overall wants to become a member of the European Union in the near future, political repressions are still ongoing in Ukraine, which including have affected you as well. Tell us about this.
One could talk endlessly about political repressions under a dictatorial regime. Many Verkhovna Rada deputies are held in Lukyanivska pre-trial detention center. Political figures are under Zelensky's unfounded sanctions. All dictatorial regimes operate the same way. They suppress the opposition, stifle freedom of speech, and take control of the mass media. All of this is happening. But I think that after the war ends, there will be a change in political leadership. Zelensky and his gang will flee the country, just like Saakashvili and his gang fled Georgia. And in principle, Ukraine will be a ready country to join the European Union because all the prerequisites are already in place today. Ukraine is buried under insane debts. It won't be able to get out, and the European Union will absorb Ukraine.
Zelensky is actually a dictator, and to the European and American partners, in fact, the entire civilized world legitimize him when they meet with him.
Yes, they legitimize him by recognizing his usurpation and acknowledging him as a military dictator. And a military dictator is very convenient for them because with just Zelensky, they can resolve issues of war, that is the supply of manpower to the front. Because the army is fully supplied and financed by the West, as is the entire state apparatus. And Zelensky, as a dictator, has just one duty: to fill his crypto wallets, amass property for himself, and supply manpower to the front. Well, that's all that's required of Zelensky. He is indeed beneficial to the Pentagon, the CIA, Michigan 6, and European leaders in the sense that he helps them allocate more money to military power in their own countries. Now, NATO is going to consider the issue of increasing their defense budget contributions from 2% to 5%. All of this is an inflated Russian rat that has seized and is tormenting the healthy body of Ukraine. All of this will eventually work against the Russian Federation. And America is now selling 35% more weapons than before the war. So Putin is the goose that lays golden eggs for the NATO and Pentagon military industrial complex.
How can you explain the fact that Ukraine currently has closed its borders to men leaving, yet some men still manage to go to Europe, America, and other civilized countries? In reality, this is a war for the poor, while the rich have the opportunity to buy their way out. Is that fair?
War always happens at the expense of the poorer segments of the population. They start by sweeping up people from villages and small towns first and only get to the cities last, because this creates a huge opportunity for corruption among military recruiters, those who catch people, the commissions, as well as customs officers who let people through for exemptions. And that's why this entire corrupt system is now operating at full capacity in Ukraine because of Putin's invasion of Ukrainian territory. Yes, this is an unjust war because war does not produce good people. War breeds scoundrels, villains, and corrupt officials. The most notorious scoundrels profit from war, while ordinary people try to survive however they can. The rich have more money, so they are better able to save themselves. The poor have no money, so they survive poorly by hiding. So everyone has their own opportunities, and to be outraged that some multimillionaire paid, say, 20 or 30,000 to leave and managed to get out well, that's just how it is. Yes, life is unfair like that. The rich have more opportunities. So my advice to people is get rich and have those opportunities.
Europeans are starting to think about the fact that by paying taxes, they are financing Ukraine's defense capability. Are these expenses justified?
Yes, because Russia is being weakened and Ukraine is becoming a buffer between Europe and the Russian Federation. By and large, the countries most concerned about this war are those that border Ukraine. And between Russia and Poland, for example, lies Ukraine. Well, do you think Poland's security increases if the war is happening somewhere far away on the Russian-Ukrainian border? Of course, it increases. And that's why an armed Ukraine essentially becomes an excellent outpost against the Russian Federation. Basically, that's exactly what Putin did. Putin has, in fact, armed Ukraine to the teeth. Ukraine started out with just a hangar full of javelins, but now Ukraine is a serious armed force funded by the European Union, which is turning into a fortress against Putin, and this provides security for the European Union.
Thank you. This was Gennady Balashov and Vsevolod Filimonenko with you. Subscribe to our channels, like, leave comments, and ask your questions. We will definitely address them in the next broadcast. Become a sponsor of the channel. Good luck. Goodbye.
Thanks.